Well, Nigeria so far in the past 20 years or thereabouts has at least, or had rather, 20 budgets. That's appropriation bills presented at the National Assembly. But the big question is, how accountable have those budgets been? For this year, or at least for the coming year, budget 2021, we're looking at a budget of economic recovery and resilience. But there's so much more behind all of this. So let's speak with the man who knows so well about the budgeting process and what we have before us as a nation, talking about the 2021 budget, and also take a look at the 2020 budget. We have joining us this morning the DG of the Budget Office of the Federation, Ben Akabueze. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, first with the budget defense process at the National Assembly. We just saw you in one of those reports, and I know this is something we see every other year. We have MDAs visiting the National Assembly just to defend their budget. So let's start off from there. From the process you have seen so far, yes, it's not over, but we've had a series of MDAs defend their budget. What is your assessment? Has there been any sort of improvement from what we have seen in previous years, especially because there have been some drama, some controversies? But what's your assessment?
I think it's going reasonably well. There's commitment on both sides to get this done. And when issues arise, for those issues to be addressed, to be, sorted out, promptly. And so we believe that we are on course to have the budget passed before the end of the year.
Yes, I mean, we saw that with the previous budget. But regarding this process itself, for a lot of people, they wonder, what is the essence of it? I mean, these MDAs have presented their budgets to your office. You have collated them. Why is there a need to go through the budget defense process? How much of this is a game changer, really, in the budgeting process?
Well, I mean, to be frank with you, this is not necessarily how it's done in every country, but the parliament, in its own wisdom, has chosen to deal with this, this way, to engage every single, MDA. I mean, if you look at the United States of America, from which we largely borrow this system of presidential democracy and all the other associated systems. You don't necessarily have every agency showing up at the Congress in DC.
Well, from what you have seen over the past few years, how productive would you say this particular process has been in our budget implementation, budget accountability and all?
Well, I think for one, many MDAs, feel under pressure that, they'll have to account to Parliament for the performance, of their previous budget and to justify the budget for the ensuing year. So to some extent, it does, add value in terms of accountability, which appears to be your focus. So, yeah. Well, and then, of course, this is often done with media and the public in attendance, and so that again, puts MDAs under some pressure that they need to be accountable, and typically nobody wants to go and make a fool of themselves or be made a fool of at those sessions.
Well, at that session, one of those sessions where you attended, you made a statement that you were concerned about some MDAs not being able to possibly pay November's salaries. Well, you gave the context and you gave a resolution, but people heard that, and maybe because they are probably employees or they know people that are employed in some of those MDAs, they got worried. So if you could just run us through that. I mean, what exactly brought us to that point? You explained how we're going to get out of it. But the question is, what happens after November? Because there's December and there's lots of months and years ahead.
Well, I'm glad, that you heard, because I was shocked at the reportage of that, especially in the print media yesterday. In fact, one had a blazing headline, "We are broke." I never said anything like that. Basically, what it is at the time that we were preparing the 2020 budget, the negotiations for the minimum wage were ongoing. They hadn't been finalized. And so the 2020 budget, personnel budget for MDAs, was based on the old salary structure. But what we did was we then made a lump sum provision in the service-wide vote to be able to deal with this situation, which we anticipated would occur towards the end of the year. And what I stated when I appeared before one of the committees, and a member raised the issue that one of the agencies that appeared before them said they were not going to be able to pay their employees. I said that it wasn't something to worry about. It was not peculiar to that agency. And I stated that it was something we had control of, and that we had identified about 428 agencies that will be in that situation. It was anticipated, and that we're working to make sure that, from the service-wide provision we had made, that those agencies receive what the funds that they need to be able to pay their staff for November and December. And so everyone is going to be paid for November and December. There's no cause for worry.
So the question is, what happens afterwards? I mean, has that issue been resolved? Because we're looking at a situation where the country says we can't afford some of these things. Our revenue is dwindling, especially because of the price of crude. We have to borrow to make up for the gap. In fact, you find this prevalent even across other states. But regarding the federal government and the MDAs, what happens afterwards? How sustainable is this?
Well, I'm not sure what I mean by afterwards. Let me say that for 2021, the personnel cost budget is based on the new salary structure. So we're not likely to have a repeat of this situation. If you're asking about how sustainable the high personnel cost is, you're right. That's something to worry about. In the 13 trillion naira budget for 2021, about 3.7 trillion is personnel cost. And so that's more than a third of the budget. And when you relate that to projected revenues, that's about 50% of revenues, on the assumption that the revenues perform at 100%. If to the extent that revenues don't perform at 100%, then it becomes even a higher percentage of the revenues. And so when you begin to spend over 50% of your revenues on personnel costs, and you need to provide for the funding for developmental projects, it's a cause for worry, and in the long term is not sustainable. But the solution is not to cut public sector wages. As you know, public sector wages are relatively low compared to the private sector. The solution remains to grow our revenues. And that's the message that is being sent across the entire service. Everyone, all hands have to be on deck to show up, revenues, and to, basically plug any leakages that may exist. And
now, regarding
we deal with the revenue problem, a lot of the issues that are worrying with respect to government's fiscal situation will basically be taken care of, whether it's the high personnel cost relative to total revenues, whether it's the debt service to revenue ratio, or even the inadequate level of funding available to meet our huge infrastructure deficit. All of these will be taken care of as we grow revenues.
If I can just take you up on that revenue aspect, because, a lot of Nigerians are wondering, how will this budget affect me? That's usually the question, what's in it for me? Now, you've talked about revenues, and I just want to know, how is this budget going to find that delicate balance between ensuring that we perform better in terms of generating revenue, But then don't also forget, this has been a challenging year for people. COVID-19 struck and economic losses followed. So how do you strike that balance between generating as much revenue and also ensuring that that budget supports people that have lost their means of livelihood? How is that delicate balance being handled?
Well, incidentally, to be able to support people as much as we ought to, we need first to find the revenues. When you look at the current structure of our revenues, unlike in most countries around the world, where taxation represents the principal source of funding for government, we're still heavily dependent on revenues from natural resources, and so when we talk about revenue, we're talking about optimizing the revenues from these resources, whether they be oil, whether they be solid minerals, or other natural endowments. But there's no escaping the fact that people and businesses that generate profits have got to pay their taxes. Remember, taxation is on profit. So if any business that isn't generating profits in the present circumstances isn't going to be forced to pay taxes, on non-existent, revenues. So that's, that's the reality.
Well,
so I mean, I don't think that people need to worry about, the impact of government's drive for revenues in if things are not exactly working out for them at the moment. It's also noteworthy that in this budget, government has stepped up provisions for to provide assistance for people. For instance, there is a provision for the youth a youth investment fund, which has been made in this budget, despite the challenging revenue situation. The social investment program has been, sustained, and even across other, agencies like the Ministry of Women Affairs, there are, programs, to support, women. And
well, Mr. Akabueze, you talked about leakages the other time, and of course, that's been an ongoing conversation over the years. But then I know that one of the ways in which these leakages come to the fore is through the Auditor General's report year after year. And we know that since 2013, several reports have been released by the Office of the Auditor General. But what is of concern is the one that's in the public space, in recent time. On the front page of the dailies, for instance, this morning, we have one that says about 801 federal agencies and 110 foreign missions have not been audited since 2017. And in the same Auditor General's report of this year, there is a report that says 11 of them have never been audited, down from 69 in the 2016 report. So one do not have audited reports. Is there a justification for them to have budgetary allocation when they have not retired what they spent the previous year?
Well, first of all, let's understand that when it comes to audit, we have internal audit, okay? There's an internal audit function, which is provided by the Office of the Accountant General, and you have internal auditors embedded in all the agencies. And then you have what is called the federal auditors, with staff of the Auditor General of the Federation, also embedded in agencies. And so on a daily basis, there's auditing going on. Nevertheless, that's not a reason for the full year external audits not to be done on a timely basis. But you see, the decision to get audits done on a timely basis is not one that everybody in the establishment has responsibility for. And so what we need to do is not, the solution is not to deny those agencies, budgets, because those agencies exist and they have functions to perform. They have public goods and services to deliver. So when you deny them budgets, it's not so much them. I mean, the one that comes to them is their personnel cost, budget. The rest of it is to be able to deliver public goods and services. What needs to happen is that the chief executives of those agencies and the boards or whoever is responsible for the failure to get the audits done on a timely basis, those are the people who need to be sanctioned. The solution is not to deny them budgets.
Well, while that is a given, Mr. Akabueze, one then wonders, how do we, get back all those monies? Because you have once said on this program that one way to get ourselves out of a financial mess is to spend our way out of it. There are more than 2 trillion naira locked in all of these agencies, well, a good number of these agencies that have not been fully remitted or not duly accounted for, many of them violating the financial regulations, many of them violating certain provisions of the Constitution in the spendings, and yet they continue to get these allocations. More than 2 trillion, according to the analysis from the Auditor General's report of 2017. How do we begin to, address this? Because if we do not find a way to block those leakages, just as you have mentioned, 2 trillion naira is already, quote unquote, floating around somewhere. So what do we need to do?
Well, I mean, it's a tough job, but we just need to keep, pressing. You observed earlier on that from 69 agencies that had ever been audited, the number is down to 11. Hopefully by this time next year, we'll be saying it's down to 0. And what has happened is the government is basically increasing the firepower in terms of oversight. The ICPC, for instance, is playing an increasingly greater role in tracking down these leakages. So it's not just left to the office of the Auditor General. In the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning headquarters, we have the Essential Initiative on Continuous Audit that is also going out and helping out. We're also from the Budget Office constituting teams that go out and track. There's currently a joint team of the Budget Office, the Office of the Accountant General, PICA, that and the Office of the Head of the Service that is out there trying to track down any malpractices with respect to personnel costs. So it's an ongoing battle.
So what do you rely on?
We're making progress.
Right. You mean you rely on the internal audit for your budget monitoring and evaluation, because as it stands right now, we don't exactly have the federal audit that you mentioned. So is that what you rely on?
No. Remember I said there are federal auditors embedded in all the agencies. And those federal auditors review transactions as they occur. Okay, so, which is different from then, doing a holistic audit of the financial statements of those agencies. But there are staff of the Auditor General embedded in every agency, apart from the internal auditors from the Office of the Accountant General. And on a daily basis, as transactions occur, they're being audited. Remember, the government system is automated also. And so there are audit trails, designed into the system. There are systems of internal controls that are built into the system. And basically what the audit does at the end of the day is to certify that those controls have worked as they are designed to work, and that people haven't basically been able to breach them. And because at the end of the day, every internal control system, no matter how good it is, can be breached where there is collusion.
Basically, regardless of the fact that there hasn't been audit conducted in some of his MDAs since 2017, you're saying that you still have something you rely on in terms of budget monitoring and the rest.
Oh, yes. And I mean, we also have a budget monitoring and evaluation department. So we go out, but then we can only do a sample of projects. There are thousands and thousands of projects in every year's budget. And so it's only on a sampling basis that the monitoring and evaluation occurs. But when an agency becomes notorious for, some difficulties, or let me just say, irregularities in their project execution, then you can zero in to that agency and do a broader, evaluation.
Well, the House of Reps, during an investigative hearing, had this to say about your office. And it says, even in fund allocation for the budget, the Director General of the Budget Office has intentionally, deliberately underfunded the Office of the Auditor General so that he wouldn't be able to discharge its duties and uncover all the illegal criminal activities and looting going on in the country. Now, that's direct. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, I think that that's a patently unfair statement. In any case, what we send to the National Assembly is a budget proposal, and year in, year out, the National Assembly intervenes to alter the provisions made for different MDAs. So if anybody had felt that way, it was within their right to alter whatever provision that has been made, and they haven't done so in the past. So to make a statement like that is, I think, pure grandstanding and playing to the gallery.
But the other part of that statement is saying that, the Auditor General is not able to uncover all the illegal criminal activities and looting going on in the country. That statement is a statement of, shortly saying, well, definitely this is ongoing in the country. So how do we begin to uncover all that if the Auditor General, for example, is not getting enough funding? Well, you say you do sampling, but
if you make a categorical statement like that, then that means you've established that you know where the looting and all of that is going on, and you don't need the Auditor General to be able to move. Even the National Assembly can move against such agencies. I'm not here defending that they may not be, okay? And that's why I used the word earlier on that, we're constantly on the lookout for any leakages and to try to plug them. But I'm just saying, to be categorical, as the statement that you read, then means that somebody already knows that something is happening somewhere, and if that is known, it does not require the auditor report to be able to move against such an agency or whoever is responsible.
Looking at the amount budgeted for the Auditor General's office for 2021 proposal, 4.4 billion for recurrent, 251 million for capital. Is that enough face value? How do we even judge if that's enough? Because the House of Reps feels this is not enough for the Office of the Auditor General to carry out its functions.
Well, let's first of all, I'll be the first to admit here that there's not a single agency that will tell you that their budget is enough. Because overall, the total budget is a fraction of the size of the budget that we should be operating. But we're limited, we're constrained by, revenues, by inadequate resources. So the claim that it's not adequate, I'm not going to contest. And I can tell you there's not a single agency that will tell you that they have an adequate budget. All that I can say, however, is if you go and check it, look at the trajectory over the last 4 years, every single year we have increased, we've made some increase in the budget for the Office of the Auditor General, even in periods where across board agencies have seen lower budgets. Over the last 4 years, year after year, we have seen an increase in the budget for the Office of the Auditor General of the Federation.
All right. We'll go to break now. A couple of other issues to raise moving forward. And we'll take a look at the 2020 budget also, how well we performed, because we can judge from what we have done, what we will do. Please stay with us. our concluding moment with the DGBOF, Ben Akabueze, on the program this morning. Aya.
Mr. Akabueze, I just wanted to point you to just one of several infractions of the laws that guide our financing. The Auditor General's report of 2017 indicates that there were unauthorized deductions from the Federation account by revenue collecting agencies in the year 2017 to the tune of 1.5 trillion naira. Now, this has happened. We don't know how many trillions or millions of naira were involved in the previous years. We don't have the 2018 report, we don't have the 2019 report, and most certainly we don't have that of 2020. You talked about the leakages. The leakages will help us to ensure that at least we have some more liquid cash flowing around for our functions and so many other things that you see in these slides. We need to find a way to begin to readdress these things. Otherwise, they will continue. What do we have to do?
Well, one of the things we have to do is we must make these audits more timely. I mean, this is 2020. We're near the end of 2020. We're talking about the outcome of a 2017 audit. That makes it even more difficult to recover, some of that money if indeed, that number is correct. But, so hopefully we can get to a situation where the audits are done more timely and therefore any recovery actions can be more effective. But more importantly also, those reports point out to specific systemic weaknesses that enable and such leakages and therefore we must then act to tighten those controls around such weaknesses and make sure that those things do not recur. But we must also, there must be consequences when people have been found to basically been engaged in such infractions. Hopefully, and that's why in every year's budget now we have a provision for recoveries. In the 2021 budget, we've got a provision for, I believe the number is about 238 billion naira of recoveries that we project to make, because this is an ongoing, as I said, this is an ongoing exercise. So as this happens, we are also, as we establish, with certainty how much remittance any agency hasn't made, the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation is now empowered to go into their account and pull back such funds if they're still there.
So, on a final note, what's the plan for transitioning from
in the budget for?
Please go ahead. You can
go on. Please. I was going to say that apart from the general, projection for recoveries of 238 billion, in the budget for the government-owned enterprises for 2021, we've also made a provision for about 300 billion naira of recoveries of remittances due from previous periods that they may not have made.
Right. So on a final note, what's the plan for transitioning from the 2020 budget to the 2021 budget when it's eventually passed into law? Because I understand we're still in the 2020 budget, but because of the new cycle now, things have changed quite a bit. So what's the plan for transitioning smoothly such that there are no issues with disbursements and performance?
Well, basically all agencies are working very hard now to be able to, accomplish their programs and projects for the 2020 year, knowing that the way the system is designed, come 31st December, 2020, the budget for 2020 will lapse and all unutilized funds will return to the Treasury and it will no longer be able to implement the 2020 budget beyond that date. because you cannot implement two budgets simultaneously. If the budget for 2021 gets passed,
right. So what should
before the end
Nigerians...
of the year, as we project, then that budget will be ready to go from the 1st of January. So you can't run two budgets simultaneously.
Okay, so this will be our parting shots. What should Nigerians be expecting from this coming budget?
Well, Nigerians should expect, greater attention to, social welfare. Truth is, in difficult times, COVID-19 threw us back into recession, and so, people are hurting. And so in the 2021 budget, there's a lot more provision made to give the more vulnerable, a helping hand. In the 2021 budget, there's been no provision for any increases in tax rates, okay? And all that we're focusing on is, improving efficiency of collection. For the 2021 budget, aggregate capital spending has also improved. In 2020, aggregate capital budget was 26% of expenditures. In 2021, it's 29%. And so we should expect to see more investment in, infrastructure.
Right.
As going to 2021,
we'll
government is also
then
adopting a lot more creative options for, delivering public infrastructure. So,
well, we'll keep our eyes on that budget,
of,
definitely.
Concern to the public.
But we'd like to thank you so much, DG Budget Office of the Federation, Ben Akabueze, for shedding some insight into the 2021 budget.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.